Hi, in this tutorial we will discuss how to execute select queries. To execute select queries, we call the method execute query. The return type of the execute method is a result set object. First, to understand the execution of select queries, first we should know in detail about result set. So first let's discuss in detail about result set, and then we will see how we can use the result set to execute the select queries. Result set is a interface in JDBC API, and result set maintains a cursor always, and the cursor initially points to before the first row of a database table, and when we call next method, the cursor will be moved to the first row of a database table, and every time when we call next method, the cursor will move automatically to the next row in the database table. And whenever the cursor moved to the last row in the database table, and if there are no more records present in the database table, then the next method returns false. The return type of next method is a boolean. If there is a next record present in the database table, then the next method returns true, and if there are no records present in the database table and the cursor is at the last position in the database table, then the next method returns false. So we can use this next method in a while loop so that we can iterate the result set object to get all the records from the database table. And by default, result set object moves only in forward direction. It is not possible to move the result set object in backward direction, and by default result set object is not updatable. Using result set, we cannot insert another row, we cannot update row, or we cannot delete any row. But it is possible to get a scrollable and updatable result set object also. So that concept we will discuss later. As result set object can be moved only in forward direction, we can do the iteration only once, and the cursor can be moved only from the first position to the last position in the database table. Now first let's understand how we can retrieve individual column data from the database table. To get the column data, result set has different getter methods. To get the column data, we can pass either the column index or the column name as a parameter to the getter methods of a result set interface. But mentioning column index is more efficient instead of mentioning column name to retrieve the column data to the getter methods. JDBC driver converts the underlying data to the Java type, and it returns a suitable Java value. And when we use a column name to retrieve the column data, and if the table contains more than one column with the same name, then whatever the first column that matches with the given column name parameter, then that column will only be retrieved. So now let's see in this example how we can execute the select query using this result set object. First we need to get the connection object and then statement object, and we are going to retrieve all the records from the database table. So this is the query written for the select star from employee, and this query is passed as the parameter to the execute query method, and which will return the result set object. To get all the table data, we can iterate this result set by calling the next method in a while loop, and as long as this next method returns false, the cursor can be automatically moved to the next row in the database table, and we can get the corresponding column data by calling the corresponding getter methods depending on the data type of the column. Now let's execute this example. This method we are going to call in this test DAO class. Now let's execute this. We are retrieving all the records from the table. If you don't want to retrieve all the records, if you want to retrieve only partial data from the column, then we can mention the corresponding column names. As we have already mentioned that to retrieve the column data, we can either pass the column name or else we can pass the column index also. If we want to retrieve the column data by using column index, we need to mention the corresponding column index. When we are mentioning the column index, it's better to mention the column index in forward direction. If we mention column index as 1 for this getInt method, it indicates that we are going to retrieve the first column data. And if we mention 2, it indicates that we are going to retrieve the select column data. And mentioning 3 here indicates that we are going to retrieve the third column data. And using this column index is preferred if we do not explicitly mention any column name while writing the corresponding query. But when we explicitly mention the column names in a query, then mentioning column names is preferred. Now let's execute this example by mentioning the column index to get the data from the table. So here mentioning 1 indicates that we are going to get the column data for the first column, and its column type is int type. If we want to get partial data from the table, we can mention the corresponding column, or else if we want to get the data based on some condition, we can use where clause. Now from this table, I want to retrieve all the records whose employee ID is greater than a particular value. I want to retrieve all the records from the table whose employee ID is greater than 20. First, let's check the column data. Select star from employee. These are all the records present in the database table currently, and we have seen how we can retrieve the complete data from the table by executing the select query. Now we are going to execute another select query using where clause. Now from this table, I want to retrieve all of the records whose employee ID is greater than 20. Now let's execute this. There are only 4 records present in the table whose employee ID value is greater than 20. This is the way to use ResultSet object to execute the select queries. In our next video, we will discuss how we can make ResultSet object to move in forward and backward direction, and how we can make the ResultSet object as updatable.